Will you pray with me? May the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So first of all, I just need to start with a little apology, which is I'm sorry about my husky voice, and I apologise if I cough during this sermon. I've just got an infection, a chest infection, and so I'm going to be laying low a little bit for a few days and recovering from that. I also want to say thank you to so many kind words and encouragements that I've received. This really is a time, isn't it, during this pandemic where what we experience is so much kindness from people. So thank you for that too. So welcome to my locked room that we hear about in the Gospel reading. And as I read it, I felt a great connection with Thomas. It seems unfair, doesn't it, that he wasn't there when Jesus first appeared to the disciples, and then he didn't believe the disciples when they said that Jesus was risen, and so he gets dubbed Doubting Thomas, doesn't he? But I think my connection with him is because I'm a skeptic. I can't really help it. I've always been a skeptic. I don't know whether it was amplified by my job, which for many years in my career I was a scientist, a research scientist, and then also an engineer. And in these roles you really can't assume anything, and you have to question everything. And so I'm with Thomas. I'm with Thomas. You know, just because his friends have said they see Jesus, well, people sometimes believe what they want to believe, don't they? And sometimes the mind plays tricks. Just because they said that they'd seen him, did they really? And yet, I don't know if you remember in the Easter Vigil service, had the reading from Matthew's Gospel. And in Matthew's Gospel, the angel appears to the two Marys and says, Jesus has risen, just like he said he would. And that made me think, what exactly had Jesus said in Matthew's Gospel prior to that point? And it's Matthew 17 and Matthew 20. Jesus spells out pretty much exactly what's going to happen to him, and that he will rise on the third day. And none of the disciples, I don't think any of the disciples understood what Jesus meant by that. But nonetheless, in the intervening days after Jesus died, and then the disciples said to Thomas, well, you know, we've seen him, he's risen from the dead. I just wonder why Thomas didn't remember what Jesus had said and didn't twig that this was always going to happen, that Jesus said this was going to happen. And the other thing that's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus, so he feeds 5,000 people with somebody's sandwiches. He stills a storm. He turns water into wine. He raises Lazarus from the dead. And then there's the little girl that he also raises from the dead. He heals lepers, and the deaf and the dumb and the lame. Is it such a stretch to think that Jesus would rise from the dead? And so it's made me think perhaps that Thomas had a natural defense mechanism, or perhaps he had particular reasons why it was just too dangerous, really, to believe what the disciples were saying. After Jesus died, there was an awful lot of things that the disciples and Thomas had to come to terms with. Obviously, the death of their friend and teacher, but also such an awful, awful, hideous death, such an awful thing for somebody to endure. And then there's coming to terms really with how cruel the crowd was at the time, how inhumane people can be, and unjust and devious and treacherous, even just awful. And then perhaps the most painful thing to accept for Thomas and the other disciples was the reality was that they all fled like cowards. They didn't stay and be there for Jesus. On the whole, the majority of them scarpered. And also, it's just a stark reminder of living in an occupied country where the Romans were so powerful. And I think, having faced these truths, perhaps Thomas, had done that work and didn't want to let go of those things. And perhaps he saw accepting that Jesus has risen from the dead as a retrograde step, kind of step back into the delusions that he was believing. Could he really open his heart and his mind to this glimmer of hope, this possibility? And if he did allow himself to believe it, would it be even more crushing and even more painful if it was not true? Hope can sometimes feel like a dangerous and destructive thing. It reminds me of a film called Clockwise. We're having a little walk through the films of the mid-80s, I think, at the moment. And in this film called Clockwise, the lead character is played by John Cleese, and he is a very punctual person, and he needs to get somewhere on a particular time, at a particular time, to receive a great honour. And so it's obviously extremely important that he gets there, and yet life transpires against him such that he is running late, and then it looks like he won't get there at all. And each time when it looks like it's completely hopeless, there is a glimmer of hope, and something happens that makes him think he might actually get there. And at some point in the film where once again there is just a slight glimmer of hope, he says to the young lady who's with him, the girl that's with him, "It's not this despair. I can take the despair. It's the hope I can't stand." And it's a weird thing to say, isn't it? That despair might be more comfortable than hope. And yet there's so many times when I think that is true for us. The one occasion that comes to mind in my life was when my mom was poorly, and I got a call to say that I should go. I think I was told I think it was implied that she was gravely ill. And so I don't know, I put a few things together in a suitcase, a little suitcase, and I got in the car to travel along the M4 to go to Bristol. And I was just a mess. I was such a mess driving. And eventually I pulled off into a service station, and my brain was so shot that it took me 15 minutes to find the ladies' loos. And then I got a text saying that my mum had died, and it had a profound impact on me. Suddenly I felt calm. I knew what was going to happen. I knew what I needed to do, and I got in my car, and I was just so much more confident driving. It's strange, really. And my mum had a very, very difficult life, and she would always counsel me not to bank on anything. Don't bank on it, she would always say. Don't hope. Once I said I was looking forward to Christmas, and she's like, well, don't bank on it. I'm thinking, well, surely Christmas will come. But she was trying to protect me from hope, because she'd had such a difficult life, and you know, for her not to hope was a better thing. I know, certainly for me and for many people, sometimes when we're not accepting the truth and the reality of our situation, we can end up being in a difficult place or in the wrong place for a long period of time, in a wrong role or a bad relationship. And sometimes there's a false hope that keeps us in that situation for longer than we should be. So if we come back to Thomas, what do we make of this story? There's obviously themes in there of hope and despair. There are themes of faith and disbelief. And the first thing I'd like to say is we can't be too hard on ourselves. So Thomas, he was in a different place to the other disciples. He was physically in a different place and also psychologically in a different place. And we might find ourselves like that too sometimes, that people around us are feeling different things than we are. I'm really aware during this lockdown that for some people it's harder than others. Some people are feeling peaceful and reflective and productive even. Other people are feeling anxious and isolated and, you know, really missing human contact. And so we need to be gentle with ourselves and with each other, that we might be in different places. I think each of us has our own journey of faith, and Thomas's was just slightly different to the other disciples. But what I really admire about him was he said what he needed. He said that he needed to see Jesus, and he needed to be able to put his finger in the wounds, his hand in Jesus' side. It sounds grisly, but that's what he needed. And then Jesus came and gave him what he needed. And, you know, what a beautiful thing that it was Jesus's wounds that healed Thomas, healed him of his pain, healed him of his despair, healed him of his disbelief, and gave him an entirely new life. It was Jesus' presence, Jesus' wounds that did that. The second thing is about hope. Now, in the Christian story, there's no resurrection without first there being a crucifixion. And sometimes I think we do hold on to delusions or false hope, or we refuse to face the truth. And we hope that something will magically be fixed if we just keep hoping, keep praying. And some things simply will never be the way that we want them to be. In the 12-step program for addicts, the first step is to admit powerlessness and to give up this whole false hope that the problem will be fixed by willpower, or the problem doesn't exist, or the problem will be fixed by, good vibes or good fortune, or at some point in the future it will disappear. False hope has to be sacrificed on the cross. And sometimes, and quite often, this is true for addicts, it's a huge jolt that's required to change the direction that we're going in. Addicts will often talk about hitting rock bottom. It's something that has changed, that suddenly makes us think about these things. And after we've had a jolt, we can start to have true hope, and that's hope not based on wishful thinking. It's hope based on the idea that God is with us and in us and around us and beside us, even if we can't feel it at the time, and that somehow we and the whole of creation is infused with the mysterious, the beautiful. Something else is within us and around us. And of course that we are in a universe created by a God of love. So in these times of COVID-19, we are all affected in different ways. We may feel that peaceful, but we may feel angry or despairing or resentful. We may not be feeling the same as everyone else, and taking time to be clear about what we need or what we feel and expressing it, just like Thomas did, to God and to others, is releasing. Thomas had presumably no fear of judgment, or maybe he didn't care, I don't know. And like Thomas, a jolt might allow us to see things differently. I read an article by Charles Eisenstein, who's a speaker and author, and he said this: COVID-19 is like a rehab intervention that breaks the addictive hold of normality. To interrupt a habit is to make it visible. It is to turn it from a compulsion to a choice. When the crisis subsides, we might have occasion to ask whether we want to return to normal, or whether there might be something we've seen during this break in the routines that we want to bring into the future. COVID-19 is showing us that when humanity is united in common cause, phenomenally rapid change is possible. None of the world's problems are technically difficult to solve. They originate in human disagreement. In coherency, humans' creative powers are boundless. Now, incidentally, I read a report today that said only 9% of people surveyed wanted a return to normal. So I wonder if that is true for you, what are you going to do differently from now on? And how can we do different things as a church or a nation or in the world? If 91% of us agree that we don't want to go back to what was normal, surely things must change. I'd really like to get a blog post going about this, so please do contribute. And so I pray for all of us that we might have a hope, not a false hope, but a true hope in a better future. That we may continue our faith journeys even though we can't meet together. Not in the same way, anyway. And I pray that we might be able to voice our struggles like Thomas did and find that through Christ's wounds we too are healed and the world is healed. Amen.